Hey, welcome to the Stronghold Digital Mining update. Let's just call it an update. So here's the deal, right? As we've discussed before, we're in a bit of a holding pattern. So as of the most recent investor presentation, it has become abundantly clear, not just to me, but to all of us, that Stronghold Digital Mining is very much in play. This is no longer a speculative concept, right? This is as black and white as it gets. So what's going to happen next? If there is going to be some sort of merger or acquisition, my intuition tells me that it's probably going to happen before our next investor presentation. And by that, I don't necessarily mean the day before, but rather at some point in time between, say, like now and whenever that next investor presentation happens to be. That's not to suggest that some sort of agreement, be it an acquisition or a merger, could not take place after that. But let's walk through a scenario. If the reason why there was no Q&A at the end of this most recent investor presentation was due to the sensitive nature of, like ongoing conversations or just, sort of the ongoing review process, right, that has been undertaken by both the investment bank that's been, retained by Stronghold Digital Mining, in consultation with the law firm that is also a part of this process, right? If all of that created a scenario that's a bit sensitive, hey, we want to watch out what we're saying, we don't want to necessarily front run anything, and we don't want to necessarily answer any questions, how do you do that again for the next investor presentation? I mean, will there no longer be Q&As until this process is concluded one way or the other? Here's something else to consider. At this point, I think Stronghold Digital Mining has put its cards on the table. And yes, I understand there are a lot of detractors out there that say, yeah, man, the cards that have been put on the table are cards that aren't a very strong hand. I beg to differ with that a little bit, but for the sake of argument, let's just say, okay, hey, let's say it's a mediocre hand that Stronghold Digital Mining has put out there. Just for the sake of argument, I don't believe that actually, but I know that that's a prevalent view that sort of exists amongst some of us who are co-owners of this business, who are shareholders of this business, who might feel a little bit uncertain about what could happen and what the deal is. So let's look at it this way. We put our hand out there, right? Hey, these are the cards that are on the table. The reality is, right, that the overwhelming majority of potential acquirers, meaning companies that might acquire Stronghold Digital Mining, they're likely companies that are very familiar with litigation. Litigation is just a part of life. Okay, if you haven't, it's just one of those things. Litigation happens all the time. The things that are alleged in a complaint, right, in a lawsuit, there's no verification process as to what's really put in there. It could be anything. Sure, there's an attestation that's oftentimes made, hey, I believe that to the best of my knowledge, everything that's stated in this complaint is true and factual. But, again, there's a lot of leeway there insofar as what one might genuinely believe to be true, right? I mean, and it could be very not true. But if you believe it to be true, well, then, hey, right? So with that said, right, litigation being a part of everyday life, right? Hey, litigation, especially in the corporate world, in the context of being a publicly traded entity and being that lightning rod for litigation, any potential acquiring company is themselves likely to be the subject of numerous lawsuits at any given point in time. So I don't think that the litigation aspect is really the issue that would potentially dissuade the right company from being interested in Stronghold Digital Mining. What I do think could potentially be a bit of a decision-making wedge, right? Something that a company would have to say, hey, do I really feel comfortable with this or not? Are the mine waste to energy facilities. And by that, I mean, hey, I'm interested in the data centers. I will acquire those data centers without thinking twice. I'm not sure, though, if I'm interested in also acquiring a mine waste to energy facility that, in the case of Scrubgrass and Panther Creek, are arguably kind of tied in to the data centers, right? For example, if let's say you're a Bitcoin mining company, publicly traded Bitcoin mining company, and you definitely have a need for data centers, right? But hey, all you've ever done as a publicly traded company is plug machines in, optimize their firmware, right? You're not really dealing with energy production. That's just something you're buying, you're just like kind of like buying a plug, so to speak, right? And that's what you're familiar with. That's what you're comfortable with. Hey, you're told that the electricity is coming from really good places, right? Nothing bad, nothing dirty. It's all clean, pure, beautiful, right? So, hey, that's what you're used to. That's what you're familiar with. The idea of owning an energy producing asset is foreign to you. And that's okay. That's understandable. And that's why I am not entirely convinced that the so-called, like traditional publicly traded Bitcoin mining company that has up until now mostly just been interested in buying Bitcoin mining machines and plugging them in and tweaking them to enhance their performance. I don't know that that type of company is necessarily going to be sure like what to do with something like a Scrubgrass or a Panther Creek. I'm not sure they're going to really know what to do with a carbon capture project, right? I don't know that they really have any interest in being involved with mine waste reclamation. It's just like, hey man, we're into buying Bitcoin mining machines and plugging them in and optimizing the firmware and, seeing our stock price go up 10,000%, so to speak, right? That's all we know. And that's all we want to keep doing. So in that regard, it raises a question then, hey, is it plausible or even possible that Stronghold Digital Mining, right, can organize its assets in such a way so that you see the energy production portion of the business perhaps go to one buyer, maybe the data centers go to another buyer. I was recently chatting with somebody and it's kind of like, hey, like if you're an acquirer of the data center, ostensibly you might want the mine waste to energy facility to be your primary source of electricity when it makes sense for that to be the case. And when it doesn't make sense for that to be the case, for the grid to provide the electricity, right, through some power purchase agreement of some kind. And that's kind of course, obviously what Stronghold Digital Mining has been attempting to do, and not even just attempting, actually doing, right, by being able to toggle the data centers off and on and either sell the electricity to the grid or use it internally to mine Bitcoin. But again, this, so think about this, right? If you're a traditional, Bitcoin mining company that's just kind of going long Bitcoin mining machines, like, this whole issue of like, hey man, I just don't know if I want that power plant to be something I need to deal with. So, hey, to the extent something structured whereby the data center is acquired by one of those traditional Bitcoin mining companies with some sort of parallel agreement in place whereby, hey, there's some sort of like power purchase agreement so that, hey, these entities can focus on what they do best, which is buying Bitcoin mining machines, plugging them in and adjusting the firmware. Hey, then that's maybe one potential avenue. But, when we hear about companies, and I'm not going to mention specific names here, but that are, for example, in the literal coal mining industry, and a company in particular that I'm thinking of this company's name has been mentioned on X by one of the friends of these broadcasts and of this channel as likely being, a pretty decent candidate to maybe just acquire the whole thing. Look, if you're involved in coal mining, then you're going to be comfortable with mine waste to energy, right? You're going to be comfortable with carbon capture. You're already kind of getting your hands dirty. And it just so happens that this particular coal mining company uses, evidently, some of the excess power at some of its facilities to mine Bitcoin and has been doing so since about 2020. That to me is very interesting. Hey, what about some of the other local mine waste to energy facilities and companies, right? Would they maybe have an interest in an entity like Stronghold? Yeah, quite possibly, right? So I'm largely convinced Stronghold gets sold or merges. I have a hard time imagining a scenario where we walk back from this, but that of course is always a possibility as well. Hey, at the next investor presentation, you know what? We really made an effort to sell all or some of the parts of this business. We were unsuccessful in doing so, so therefore we continue to march forward as an independent entity, attempting to do the very best with what we've got. That is definitely a possibility. I just don't, for a variety of reasons, see that being a likely outcome. I think we get this thing merged or sold. I really do believe that. And I think that there's a very good chance that happens somewhat sooner than later. Like, in other words, I'm not really thinking, okay, this is a process that'll conclude in 2 years. I'm thinking more like maybe 2 weeks to 2 months, if even 2 months, you know? And ultimately, if there are no buyers, then yeah, you have to, or, companies that are interested in merging, then you really do have to march forward, because the challenge is that if we just stay standing in place, we slowly but surely just kind of like sink into the quicksand, right? We need to keep developing the carbon capture project. We need to, at that point, really start studying how we high grade aspects of the Bitcoin mining fleet. And we got to just kind of keep on trying to move forward, right, as a business. Something that from a purely, I think, strategic perspective that I think merits study, and I think this is something that a potential acquirer might be thinking about, right, is this topic of, hey, we acquire Stronghold Digital Mining. Does this mean we need to spend another $100 million to upgrade the Bitcoin mining machines? Now, of course, if it's a traditional publicly traded Bitcoin mining company, right, that's already buying hundreds upon hundreds of millions of dollars of Bitcoin mining machine equipment, well, then that's a no-brainer. It's like, hey, we've already got stuff that's ordered. It's arriving. We need to find a place to plug all this stuff in, right? That's a no-brainer. But let's say you're a company that is perhaps really interested in the carbon capture aspect of this, maybe mildly intrigued by the Bitcoin mining side of it, and you say to yourself, well, how do we sort of figure this out? I'd argue that it's true. When hash prices are good and are awesome, yeah, it would be awesome to own all that Bitcoin mining equipment yourself and to reap all of the rewards of owning that Bitcoin mining equipment. So on paper, that is so true. What I think we've learned over these past number of years is that it is a never-ending process of just spending gargantuan amounts of money, right, on Bitcoin mining equipment that will hopefully produce a return on investment that not only covers the amount of money that was spent to buy the equipment, but then hopefully be able to produce, a return on top of that. But inevitably, you're back to square one of having to then replace those Bitcoin mining machines in a relatively short period of time. The network hash rate has seemingly just gone just straight up, right? And there's no evidence to suggest that's going to slow down. So I think there's something to be said for a company perhaps deciding, you know what, we'd love to host the machines that others might want to put in here into these data centers, but we're not really that interested in going out into the market. I mean, hey, maybe on sort of the periphery, maybe we want to pick up like an exahash or something or less, just to have a little, a little bit of a, let's use the word, we want to have some vertical integration, maybe a little bit, right, where we own some of the equipment, but man, there's no way we want to spend tens upon tens upon tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars on Bitcoin mining machines. Hey, others are doing that already. Why don't we just make this space available? Hey, we can basically come up with a collaborative win-win arrangement. I'm not even saying to collect half the Bitcoin, but rather, hey, look, these are the operating costs of these mine waste to energy facilities. Hey, let's strike an arrangement whereby those costs are covered, right? And you know what? One of the arguments to that arrangement is, hey, well, yeah, if hash prices aren't any good, well, you're not going to get paid. Well, guess what? If you own all the equipment, you've spent potentially $100+ million and you're still not generating an ROI. The difference is, yeah, at least with the one option, you haven't spent all that money to acquire the machines in the first place. And I think there's an argument to be made that a potential acquirer, at least, might be more comfortable thinking, hey, we don't need to be on that hamster wheel of, more and more and more machines, newer and newer, faster and faster. Every couple of years, another $100+ million needs to be spent to just, high grade the fleet. Why not instead focus on running these facilities 24/7, take that beneficial use hash, use it to capture carbon, have a business that essentially can continue running. We derive some really interesting and useful revenue, not just from the mine waste to energy side of the business, but more importantly, from the carbon capture side of the business. That's not a real intriguing story for Wall Street. That's not a growth story. That's not we're going to grow 20, 30, 40% per month, per year, for eternity, which is oftentimes, it seems, right with what Wall Street really wants. But I think for a either private buyer or some other company that's like, hey, we just want to have exposure to these assets because we think we can do something with them, I think there's a way to make that work. The challenge is that if you're publicly traded, right, it's like there is an expectation that you're going to, grow to the moon and beyond. Otherwise, your stock just doesn't go anywhere. So with all of that said, I know it's been a while, but I'm strategically attempting to be more quiet than not. Let's let this process play out and let's see what happens. I'm highly optimistic that something reasonably positive will come from all of this, but there's no assurance. This is a gamble, right? That hasn't changed. I think what has changed is that at this point, every asset that Stronghold Digital Mining has is essentially for sale. Okay? Reviewing strategic alternatives, yeah, there are going to be a lot of potential alternatives. I suspect the alternative that will be most attractive to all of us as shareholders is finding a good home for these assets, right? So that ideally the mine waste to energy process can continue, the carbon capture project can be fully developed, and these data centers, for which so much money was already spent to build them, can provide useful energy to be it Bitcoin mining, machine learning, or whatever else may be over the horizon. So let's stay positive, let's be great, and let's see what the week ahead brings. Okay, we'll talk again, hopefully in the not too distant future.